The first sword appeared during the Bronze Age. It was made of copper and was uncovered at the Harappan sites in present-day Pakistan. By the Middle Ages, iron and steel swords were being mass-produced and used in battle. Soldiers were trained in swordsmanship and prepared for combat. It was before the era of guns and high-powered artillery, and face-to-face fighting was the norm. During this time in history, all of the royal generals, kings, and emperors owned personal swords. These weapons were manufactured by the greatest sword makers of the time. Many historical manuscripts document events surrounding significant swords. This video will be examining 10 world-famous and deadly swords that still survive today. 10. Tomoyuki Yamashita's sword. Tomoyuki Yamashita was a general of the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. During his military career, Tomoyuki Yamashita owned a personal sword that contained a blade manufactured by famous swordmaker Fujiwara Kananaga sometime between 1640 and 1680. The weapon had its handle remade in the early 1900s. The samurai sword was surrendered by General Yamashita, along with his army, on September 2, 1945. It was taken by General MacArthur and given to the West Point Military Museum, where it remains today. The sword is one piece in a great collection of military arms housed at the West Point Museum. 9. Curved saber of San Martin. José de San Martín was a famous Argentine general that lived from 1778 to 1850. He was the primary leader of the southern part of South America's struggle for independence from Spain. One of the most cherished possessions of José de San Martín was a curved sword that he purchased in London. San Martín admired the saber's curved blade and felt that the weapon was maneuverable and ideal for battle. For this reason, he armed his cavalries of granaderos with similar weapons, which he deemed important for charge attacks. The curved sword stayed with San Martín until his death and was then passed down to the General de la República Argentina, Don Juan Manuel de Rosas. In his will, San Martín referred to the sword as the saber that has accompanied me throughout the War of Independence of South America. In 1896, the weapon was sent to the National Historical Museum in Buenos Aires, where it remains today. In the 1960s, the sword was stolen on 2 separate occasions, and this caused museum operators to build a screened gazebo to protect the artifact. 8. Seven-branched sword. The Beech dynasty was an ancient kingdom located in southwest Korea. At its peak in the 4th century, Beech controlled colonies in China and most of the western Korean peninsula. The weapon is a 74.9 centimeters long iron sword with 6 branch-like protrusions along the central blade, which is 65.5 centimeters. The sword was developed for ceremonial purposes and was not built for battle. In 1870, a Shinto priest named Masatomo Kan discovered 2 inscriptions on the seven-branched sword. One of them states at noon on the 16th day of the 11th month, 4th year of Taiwa era, the sword was made of 100 times hardened steel. Using the sword repels 100 enemy soldiers. Appropriate for the polite Duke King. The seven-branched sword contains many statements, but the most controversial involves the phrase Enfef Lord, used when describing the King of Wa as a possible subservient to the Beech ruler. The sword is an important historical link and shows that a relationship did exist between the East Asian countries of this era. The original seven-branched sword is currently housed in the Isinokami Shrine in Nara Prefecture of Japan. It is not on display to the public. 7. Wallace Sword. William Wallace was a Scottish knight who lived from 1272 to 1305. Wallace is known for leading a resistance against England during the Wars of Scottish Independence, which were waged during the late 13th and early 14th centuries. His sword is one of the most famous in the world. The William Wallace sword is located at the National Monument in Stirling, Scotland. The shaft of the sword measures 4 feet by 4 inches in length, 132 centimeters, and it weighs 6.0 pounds, 2.7 kilograms. The sword is said to be the weapon that Wallace used at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297 and the Battle of Falkirk, 1298. The pommel on the sword consists of an onion-shaped piece of gilded iron and the grip is wrapped with dark brown leather. The hilt or handle that is currently on the Wallace sword is not the original. It is believed that the sword has been modified on separate occasions. After the execution of William Wallace, Sir John de Menteith, governor of Dumbarton Castle, received his sword. In 1505, King James IV of Scotland paid the sum of 26 shillings to have the sword bound with cords of silk. It is said that the sword underwent many changes, which might have been necessary because Wallace's original scabbard, hilt and belt were said to have been made from the dried skin of Hugh Cressingham, who was an English commander. 6. Tizona sword. El Cid is a man that was born circa 1040 in Vivar, which was a small town about 6 miles north of Burgos, the capital of Castile. During his lifetime El Cid became a successful military leader and diplomat. El Cid was the king's most valuable asset in the fight against the Moors. He was a skilled military strategist and strong swordsman. El Cid owned and used many different swords in his lifetime, but the two most famous are Colada and Tizona. Tizona is a sword that was used by El Cid to fight against the Moors. The weapon is one of Spain's most cherished relics and is believed to have been forged in Córdoba, Spain, although considerable amounts of Damascus steel can be found in its blade. Damascus steel was primarily used in the Middle East. Tizona is 103 cm per 40.5 inches long and weighs 1.1 kg/2.4 pounds. It contains two separate inscriptions, with one listing a manufactory date of 1002 and the other quoting the Catholic prayer Ave Maria. Tizona is currently on display at the Museo de Burgos in Spain. 5. Napoleon's sword. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte became the military and political leader of France after staging a coup d'état. 5 years later, the French Senate proclaimed him emperor. Historians regard Napoleon as a military genius and a man who made strong contributions to the operational art of war. On the battlefield, Napoleon carried a pistol and a sword. He owned a large collection of arms and artillery. His weapons were one of a kind and included the best materials. In the summer of 2007, a gold-encrusted sword that once belonged to Napoleon was auctioned off in France for more than $6.4 million. The sword was used by Napoleon in battle. In the early 1800s, Napoleon presented the weapon to his brother as a wedding gift. The sword was passed down from generation to generation, never leaving the Bonaparte family. In 1978, the sword was declared a national treasure in France and the winner of the auction was not identified. 4. Sword of Mercy. The Sword of Mercy is a famous weapon that once belonged to Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor was one of the last Anglo-Saxon kings of England before the Norman conquest of 1066. The Sword of Mercy has a broken blade, which is cut off short and square. In 1236, the weapon was given the name curtana and has since been used for royal ceremonies. In ancient times it was a privilege to bear this sword before the king. It was considered a merciful gesture. The story surrounding the breaking of the weapon is unknown, but mythological history indicates that the tip was broken off by an angel to prevent a wrongful killing. The Sword of Mercy is part of the crown jewels of the United Kingdom and is one of only 5 swords used during the coronation of the British monarch. The weapon is rare and is one of only a small number of swords to survive the reign of Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell is known for ordering the melting down of ancient artifacts for scrap gold and metal. During the British coronation, the Sword of Mercy is wielded as the monarch bestows knighthood upon the recipient of honor. 3. Zulfiqar Scimitar. Zulfiqar is the ancient sword of the Islamic leader Ali. Ali was the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. He ruled over the Islamic Caliphate from 656 to 661. By some historical accounts, Muhammad gave Zulfiqar to Ali at the Battle of Uhud. Muhammad admired Ali's power and strength on the battlefield and wanted to present him with the cherished weapon. The sword is a symbol of the Islamic faith and is admired by millions of people. Zulfiqar is a scimitar, which refers to a West Asian or South Asian sword with a curved blade. It is said that Ali used the sword at the Battle of the Trench, which is a famous siege attempt on the city of Medina. During the battle, Muhammad, Ali, and other Muslim defenders built trenches to protect Medina against the much larger Confederate cavalry. A few conflicting images of the famous scimitar sword exist. Some of them describe the weapon as having 2 parallel blades, emphasizing its mystical abilities and speed, while others portray Zulfiqar as a more traditionally shaped scimitar. Some historical drawings depict the sword with a split, V-shaped blade. 2. Hanjo Massimun. Masamune was a Japanese swordsmith that is widely regarded as one of the world's greatest metallurgists. The exact dates for Masamune's life are unknown, but it is believed that he worked from 1288 to 1328. Masamune's weapons have reached legendary status over the centuries. The most famous of all Masamune swords is named Hanjo Massimun. The Hanjo Massimun is so important because it represented the shogunate during the Edo period of Japan. The sword was passed down from one shogun to another for generations. In 1939 the weapon was named a national treasure in Japan, but remained in the key branch of the Tokugawa family. The last known owner of Hanjo Massimun was Tokugawa Ieyasu. Apparently Tokugawa Ieyasu gave the weapon and 14 other swords to a police station in Majiro, Japan, in December of 1945. Shortly thereafter in January 1946, the Majiro police gave the swords to Sergeant Colby Bymore, U.S. 7th Cavalry. Since that time, a Hanjo Massimun has gone missing and the whereabouts of the sword remains a mystery. Hanjo Massimun is one of the most important historical artifacts to disappear at the end of World War II. 1. Joyeuse. Charlemagne is a man that was born circa 742. He is one of the greatest rulers in world history and became king of the Franks in 768. In 800 he was named Emperor of the Romans, a position that he held for the remainder of his life. Joyeuse is the name of Charlemagne's personal sword. Today, there are two swords attributed to Joyeuse. One is a saber that is kept in the Weltliche Schatzkammer in Vienna, while the other is housed at the Louvre in France. The blade on display at the Louvre claims to be partially built from Charlemagne's original sword. The sword is made of parts from different centuries, so it can be hard to positively identify the weapon as Joyeuse. The hilt of the sword indicates a manufacture date around the time of Charlemagne. The heavily sculpted gold pommel is made in two halves and the long gold grip was once decorated with diamonds. Charlemagne's sword appears in many legends and historical documents. Bulfinch's mythology described Charlemagne using Joyeuse to behead the Saracen commander Corsable as well as to knight his friend Ogier the Dane. After the death of Charlemagne, the sword was said to have been contrarily held by the St. Denis Basilica and it was later taken to the Louvre after being carried at a coronation processional for French kings.